Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. Early voting is over and primary election day is upon us. In the coming days, we'll find out who will square off in November for the governor's race, state congressional seats, and a host of other statewide positions. WRAL state government reporter Will Doran joins us now to put it all in perspective. Will, busy week ahead.
Yes, it will be.
Now, I want to go through some of the key storylines that we'll be watching on election night. First, the presidential election. Now, President Joe Biden is running unopposed, and former President Donald Trump is expected to win the GOP nomination. But you're still watching that one closely. Why?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There's not a whole lot of suspense in who's going to win these two primaries for president. But we've seen polls that show a massive number of North Carolina voters are still undecided looking ahead to November, even though everyone expects this to be a rematch of the last presidential election, Biden-Trump round two. But, we're seeing in polls 10, 12, 15% of North Carolina voters saying they're still undecided, trying to make up their mind. So we're going to be looking at, in the Democratic side, how many people fill in the bubble for no preference. Joe Biden doesn't have any actual competition, but he does have the no preference option. And, we've seen some other states where there have been public efforts to kind of organize campaigns for more progressive voters to do that as a protest against Biden. There hasn't really been that here in North Carolina, but, there could still just be a kind of natural groundswell of, individuals who are a little dissatisfied and want to make that known. And then on the Republican side, Nikki Haley is polling at around 20% in the GOP primary, and that's been consistent for a couple of months now in polls. But we'll see, when people actually go out to vote, what level of support she does have, which could indicate kind of what the never Trump Republican vote is like here in North Carolina.
Now, just below that on the ticket will be the gubernatorial race. What are you watching there?
Yes, so these are more competitive, a little more interesting than the presidential primaries. On the Democratic side, you've got 5 candidates. Really, the two main ones are Josh Stein, the Attorney General, and Mike Morgan, a recently retired state Supreme Court justice. They have been battling it out. Stein is considered the front runner there, but Morgan is making a push for black voters in particular. He is black, Stein is white. Either of them would make history if they were to become governor in November. Morgan is the first black governor, Stein is the first Jewish governor. On the Republican side, you've got 3 contenders. You have Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson, State Treasurer Dale Folwell, and Bill Graham, who is a lawyer and businessman from Salisbury. Robinson is the leading candidate there, and he also could make history in November if he becomes governor as potentially the first black governor. So we could actually have a situation where we have potentially 2 black candidates for governor in a state where neither party has ever nominated a black person to be governor before. It could be really fascinating to watch from that perspective.
Whoever wins the gubernatorial nominations, is there any way that they could be affected by who wins the presidential nominations?
I think that is a real possibility here because, in North Carolina, unaffiliated voters can choose whichever party's primary they want to vote in. And one, unaffiliated voters are the biggest block of voters in the state. There's more people who are unaffiliated than there are Republican or Democrat. And 2, with Democrats not having a real presidential primary, you could see a lot of left-leaning unaffiliated voters decide to vote in the GOP primary. And, probably for a lot of them, it would just be, to cast a vote against Trump in the presidential race. But, with Mark Robinson being so closely tied to Trump, I don't know what the effect there could be. Could some of those, kind of more liberal unaffiliated voters, vote for, Folwell or Graham in that governor's race? We don't know. The polling, of course, of Republican voters shows that Robinson is a heavy favorite there. But, if that race kind of gets muddied up with, lots of unaffiliated voters picking those Republican ballots, that could really change the dynamics.
Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about 2 hotly contested congressional primaries and new voting rules. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Will Doran about North Carolina's primary elections. Election day is Tuesday. Will, there are 2 pretty competitive primaries in local congressional districts. What are you paying attention to there?
Yes, so we've got the 1st District and the 13th District. Let's start with the 1st. That covers basically from the areas just to the northeast of Wake County all the way throughout all of northeastern North Carolina. It's a really broad geographic district that covers a lot of rural territory. And for decades, it has been represented by a black Democrat in Congress. And it's currently represented by a black Democrat in Congress, Don Davis, who succeeded G.K. Butterfield, who recently retired. But that district was redrawn last year by the state legislature to be competitive, really, for the first time, possibly ever, certainly in a long time. And so whoever wins the Republican nomination there, suddenly that race has a lot more importance because it's probably going to be the only competitive congressional race we have in North Carolina this year. So on the GOP side, we have Sandy Smith and Lori Buckout facing out. Sandy Smith has been the nominee for the past 2 elections. She has lost both elections to Don Davis and to G.K. Butterfield. And she has a history that's spotted with some allegations of domestic violence, other issues like that. Lori Buckout is kind of seen as the more establishment favorite in that race, but she is not as well liked by the conservative crowd, the pro-Trump crowd, who really backs Smith, and Smith is really popular among Trump supporters. So that's going to be really interesting, kind of which way GOP voters go in that race. Do they go with the establishment pick or the more MAGA pick? Now, in the 13th district, it's the complete opposite. It used to be a competitive district. It has now been redrawn to be just very heavily conservative. So whoever wins this Republican primary in the 13th district is almost certainly going to go to Congress in November. And this district kind of skirts around the triangle. It starts on the Virginia border, just north of Raleigh, kind of goes to the east, picks up parts of Wake Forest, parts of Garner, and then swings around, picks up Johnston, Harnett, Lee counties. And there are 14 Republicans who are running in this primary.
Wow. Yeah.
Just as a sign of what a good opportunity it is for Republicans. There's just so many people threw their hats into the ring. There's 4 or 5 who are considered kind of the most serious candidates. Most of the about half the population lives in either Johnston or Wake counties, and so kind of the front runners you see are folks who are from those 2 counties. It's gotten lots of negative ads flying around there, lots of money. This is a race that Donald Trump has not endorsed someone in. And so it's probably going to be won by, whichever candidate is able to spend the most money.
Could there be a runoff?
There could absolutely be a runoff. The rule here in North Carolina is that if no one gets above 30% of the vote, it goes to a runoff. And with 14 candidates, you just do the math. Even if some of the, candidates who aren't, the front runners, even if they, you get 7 or 8 of them picking up 5, 6, 7% of the vote, that really adds up, and I think we are definitely expecting to see a runoff. And the runoff would be between the top 2 vote getters if no one gets above 30%.
Now, closer to home, we're going to see turnover in a number of Council of State seats. Now, these are those close to the ground seats that oversee the inner workings of state government. What are the storylines there?
Yes. So the governor sits on the Council of State, but there are 9 other elected officials who sit on that, and they kind of run the executive branch. And, you've got everybody from the lieutenant governor to the attorney general to offices that people might not even know we elect here in North Carolina. Things like the insurance commissioner, the labor commissioner, the agriculture secretary, the state auditor. And, each of those roles has a very specific and very important role to play in state government. But one that can also get a little bit lost in the shuffle when you're also talking about president and governor and Congress and all these other races. There's a lot of research for voters to do, ahead of time when they're going to the polls to look up these races, look up these candidates, see what folks have said. And, plenty of, media organizations, including us, have voter guides out there online that I would definitely suggest people use to do their research in some of those races. I think probably the biggest one is the attorney general's race. On the Republican side, there is no primary there. Dan Bishop, who's a U.S. representative, is leaving Congress to run for attorney general. I don't know if that says more about the Attorney General's power or more about what it's like to be in Congress right now. But he has made that move and is unopposed on the GOP side. On the Democratic side, you have three candidates: Tim Dunn, who's a lawyer from Fayetteville, another U.S. Congressman, Jeff Jackson of Charlotte, and Satana DeBerry, the Durham DA, who's kind of a reform-minded prosecutor. And there's not really a lot of sense in that race as to who's the favorite. I think Jeff Jackson certainly has the biggest name recognition around the state, but Satana DeBerry is really popular, especially in progressive circles. And so, that race could be really close. And, the Attorney General is pretty powerful in North Carolina, makes a lot of decisions on, which companies to go after or to not go after for consumer protections issues. When there's issues of pollution, they're often in charge of deciding, what the state's reaction is going to be to that sort of thing. And, if they can sue the federal government, it really has a lot of power.
Now, Republican lawmakers have made a number of changes to election rules in the state. Many voters will see them in action for the first time on Tuesday, right?
That is correct. So the two biggest ones are voter ID, which technically did get kind of a test run in the municipal elections last year, but hardly anybody voted in those municipal elections. So for the most part, voters are going to be seeing voter ID rules for the first time now. And there's a whole list of acceptable types of photo IDs online at the State Board of Elections website. Most people have a driver's license, but if you don't, or if yours is expired, you need to go and figure out okay, is there another one of these IDs that I do have that I can use? And I should note, if you don't have an acceptable ID, in most cases, you are still going to be allowed to vote. You're just going to have to cast what's known as a provisional ballot, and you're going to have to fill out some extra paperwork. There's just more steps. But for the most part, folks shouldn't run into too many issues with that. The other factor that could actually have a potentially bigger impact on whether or not people's votes get counted is changes to mail-in voting deadlines. In the past, as long as you got your ballot in the mail on or before Election Day, it could have up to 3 days after the election to arrive in the mail and get counted. And the intent of that was, to let people wait as long as possible, to learn about the candidates and, make their choices. That is no longer the case. The state legislature got rid of that grace period in a new law that went into effect this year. And so now any ballots that are not in the mail by the end of Election Day Tuesday are not going to get counted. Even if you put it in the mail, days ago, if it's not received, it won't get counted. So people who, are listening to this podcast right now and are sitting there looking at their mail-in ballot on the kitchen table, you probably don't want to put that in the mail. You have options. You can either go in person to vote on Tuesday, or you can fill out that ballot like you were going to put it in the mail, but instead of going to the mailbox, you can go to your county elections board office and just hand it to somebody in person.
And then we do it again. This is just an appetizer for the main course in November. Is there anything that you're watching as the general election ramps up?
Well, we have to wait for the results to see what exactly the storylines are going to be here. But, like I mentioned earlier, really a key factor is going to be how dissatisfied do voters seem with Biden or with Trump, both of whom are, don't have great favorability numbers in opinion polls. A lot of voters say, I don't want either of these guys on the ballot, but their parties like them. And, it seems that they are going to be on the ballot. So I think that's the main thing to watch, especially here in North Carolina. I mean, we're such a close swing state. Trump won here in 2020 by only 1.5% of the vote. I mean, it was a really narrow win. I think it was actually the closest Trump state in the country. And I think only Georgia was closer in total. So, we are really balanced on a knife's edge here in North Carolina, and just the handful of voters could really swing it one way or another.
And there's going to be plenty of advertising too, right?
Oh, yes. I mean, if you're feeling sick of the TV ads already, just wait. It's gonna be all over the airwaves. And, speaking from experience from having covered, the last several presidential elections, Trump is going to be here. It's going to feel like every other week. Biden is going to be here every other week. And, they're going to be sending in their surrogates and their supporters in the meantime. It's going to be a heavy, heavy pressure on North Carolina. And then, we're going to have the governor's race that is probably going to be pretty nasty. We're going to have a ton of turnover in Congress and in the Council of State, and in all of those races, when you don't have incumbents, you have people who are trying to get their name out there. How do you do that? Take out ads. So there's going to be a lot of money flying around, a lot of ads, and probably a lot of voters will be looking forward to December when these elections are done.
Well, some busy days and months ahead. Thanks, Will.
Thank you.
That's WRAL State Government reporter Will Doran for his preview of Tuesday's elections. Go to the NC Capital section of WRAL.com. And don't forget to tune in to WRAL and WRAL News Plus for election night results. You'll also find them at WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.